Ladies and gentlemen, imagine standing in a crowded room, surrounded by voices, yet feeling like no one truly sees you. Imagine reaching out for a hand, only to grasp thin air. Imagine waking up every day knowing that no one is waiting for your call, no one is checking in, no one truly cares. This is not a tragedy. This is not the end. This is the beginning of something powerful. Because the man with no friends is not weak, he is awakening. He is not lost, he is discovering. He is not broken, he is rebuilding. And today I am here to tell you that if you have ever felt alone, if you have ever questioned your worth because of your solitude, then listen closely. Because by the end of this speech, you will no longer see loneliness as your enemy, you will see it as your greatest teacher. Being alone is often mistaken for weakness, but it can be a source of immense inner strength. Society has conditioned us to believe that having a large social circle, constant engagement, and validation from others are measures of success. We are taught that solitude is something to be feared, something to escape from. But what if I told you that the greatest transformations happen in solitude? What if I told you that the most powerful people in history have, at some point, walked alone? Loneliness is often seen as an enemy, a dark shadow that follows us when friendships fade, relationships break, and social connections weaken. People fear being alone because they equate it with rejection, with not being good enough. They assume that a person without friends has somehow failed at life. But that assumption is far from the truth. Sometimes being alone is not a punishment, it is a phase of growth, a time for reflection, a season of transformation that forces a person to look inward and discover their true self. When a person is surrounded by friends, their thoughts are often shaped by external influences. Their choices are guided by the opinions of others. They seek approval before making decisions, and their happiness is often tied to the presence of those around them. But when that social bubble bursts, when the laughter fades, and the noise disappears, what remains is the raw version of oneself. It is in those moments that a person begins to see who they truly are without the masks, without the expectations, without the need to impress. A man with no friends is forced to become his own guide, his own motivator, and his own source of strength. He does not have the luxury of relying on others to lift him when he falls. He does not have the constant reassurance that everything will be okay. Instead, he must look in the mirror and find that reassurance within himself. He must learn to trust his own instincts, to believe in his own journey, and to keep moving forward even when the world offers no hand to hold. There is immense power in solitude. It is in silence that the greatest ideas are born. It is in isolation that dreams take shape. The world's most successful individuals, the ones who changed history, the ones who left an impact, all had moments where they walked alone. They faced rejection, they faced doubt, and they faced loneliness. But instead of fearing it, they embraced it. They used that time to master their skills, to strengthen their mindset, and to build something so powerful that one day the world had no choice but to notice them. A man with no friends learns to be independent in a way that most people never do. He does not wait for someone to encourage him, he becomes his own motivation. He does not seek approval. He learns to trust his own decisions. He does not need company to feel complete, he finds fulfillment within himself. This level of self-reliance is rare, but it is also the foundation of true strength. People often chase friendships because they fear the idea of being alone. They compromise their values, they change who they are, and they tolerate treatment they do not deserve, all for the sake of belonging. They believe that being surrounded by people, even the wrong ones, is better than being alone. But what they fail to realize is that forced friendships, shallow connections, and temporary companionships do more harm than good. They drain energy, they create self-doubt, and they prevent a person from growing into their fullest potential. A man with no friends does not have these distractions. He does not waste time on meaningless conversations. He does not lower his standards just to fit in. He does not dilute his dreams to match the expectations of others. Instead, he uses his time to build himself. He reads, he learns, he grows. He becomes so strong mentally and emotionally that when he finally steps back into the world, he is not looking for acceptance, he is looking for purpose. There is an unmatched sense of peace in knowing that you can stand on your own. When you no longer fear solitude, when you no longer seek validation, when you no longer depend on others for happiness, you become unstoppable. You develop a resilience that no amount of rejection can break. You cultivate an inner world so rich that even in the absence of friends, you are never truly alone. Most people spend their lives avoiding loneliness, running from silence, filling every moment with distractions so they never have to face themselves. But the man with no friends has no such escape. He sits with himself. He faces his doubts. He confronts his fears, And in doing so, he discovers a strength that others will never know. The world often tells us that friendship is a necessity, that a person without friends is incomplete. But the truth is, solitude is not a sign of failure, it is a path to self-discovery. It is a phase that every great mind, every strong soul, and every successful person has walked through. The man with no friends does not seek approval, he does not beg for company, and he does not fear being alone. He understands that loneliness is not an enemy, it is a teacher. And the lessons it imparts are the kind that turn ordinary people into extraordinary individuals. When you have no one to lean on, you are forced to confront your truest self. The world is filled with distractions, constant conversations, social media updates, opinions, and expectations. In the presence of others, it is easy to lose yourself to become a reflection of what they want you to be. But when you are alone, there is no one left to impress, no role to play, no masks to wear. It is just you facing yourself with no escape from your thoughts, your fears, your weaknesses, and your truths. For many, this is an uncomfortable experience. The noise of the world often drowns out the voice inside, making it easy to ignore the things we do not want to confront. But when that noise disappears, when there are no friends to validate you, no company to distract you, and no one to fill the silence, you are left with only one option to face yourself. And that is where the real journey begins. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this moment. They surround themselves with people, not because they truly connect with them, but because they are afraid of being alone. They fill every second with conversations, even meaningless ones, just to avoid sitting in silence with their thoughts. They seek constant validation, needing others to reassure them that they are worthy, that they are enough, that they are doing the right thing. But what happens when that external validation is gone? What happens when there is no one left to reassure you? That is when you realize that the only voice that truly matters is your own. A man with no friends has no choice but to become brutally honest with himself. There is no one to blame for his failures, no one to lean on for motivation, no one to tell him what to do next. He must take full responsibility for his life, his choices, his actions, and his growth. He must ask himself the hard questions: who am I when no one is watching? What do I truly want? What fears am I hiding from? What weaknesses am I ignoring? And most importantly, who do I want to become? This level of self-reflection is rare. Most people never get the chance to truly know themselves because they are too busy living through the opinions of others. They measure their worth by how many friends they have, how many people like them, how much attention they receive. They let their identity be shaped by external forces, never stopping to ask if those forces align with who they truly are. But the man with no friends has no choice but to seek answers from within. He learns to listen to himself, to trust his instincts, to understand his emotions, and to build a life based on his own values rather than the expectations of others. At first, this process is painful. When you strip away all distractions, you are left with nothing but reality, the good, the bad, and everything in between. You start to see your flaws, your regrets, your mistakes. You begin to understand why you have been running from silence for so long. But instead of being something to fear, this moment becomes an opportunity. It is the first step toward true transformation. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can begin to change. A man with no friends learns to be his own greatest critic, but also his own biggest supporter. He does not seek validation from others because he has learned to validate himself. He does not need constant reassurance because he has built inner confidence that cannot be shaken by the opinions of others. He does not run from his fears because he has already faced them in the silence of his solitude. This kind of self-awareness is rare, but it is also the foundation of true strength. Many people believe that strength comes from being surrounded by others, from having a network of support, from being uplifted by those around you. And while community and friendship can be beautiful, they can also become a crutch. When you always have someone to rely on, you never learn to stand on your own. When you always have someone to motivate you, you never develop self-discipline. When you always have someone to encourage you, you never build the inner voice that tells you to keep going, even when no one is watching. A man with no friends does not have the luxury of external support. He must become his own motivator, his own teacher, his own guide. He must learn to find joy without company, to celebrate his victories without applause, to keep pushing forward even when no one is there to cheer him on. And in doing so, he builds a foundation so strong that nothing can shake him. When a person reaches this level of self-reliance, they become unstoppable. They are no longer controlled by the opinions of others. They no longer fear rejection. They no longer feel the need to fit in. They walk their own path on their own terms with complete confidence in who they are. They do not need a crowd to validate their worth because they have already done the work to understand their own value. This journey is not easy. It requires facing the parts of yourself that you have been avoiding. It requires letting go of the need for constant validation. It requires learning to sit in silence and be okay with what you find there. But once you do, you emerge as someone who is no longer afraid of being alone because you have discovered that the greatest strength lies not in the presence of others, but in the relationship you build with yourself. Have you ever felt the kind of loneliness that makes the world seem distant, where silence becomes the loudest noise and every shadow feels heavier than before? The kind of loneliness that makes you question your own existence, your own worth, and the meaning of everything around you? Imagine waking up every morning knowing that there is no one to call, no one to text, no one to share your thoughts with. Imagine walking through life as if you are invisible, as if your presence or absence does not make a difference. A man with no friends is often seen as someone unfortunate, someone who is missing out on the joys of companionship, laughter, and shared memories. Society teaches us that friendships are the foundation of happiness, that being surrounded by people is a sign of success. But what if I told you that solitude is not a curse but a gift? What if I told you that in loneliness, a person discovers a power that those who are constantly surrounded by others never get to experience? When a man has no friends, he is forced to confront the deepest parts of himself. There is no distraction, no external noise to drown out the thoughts in his head. He cannot escape into small talk or seek comfort in the presence of others. He is left alone with his fears, his doubts, his regrets, and his dreams. And while this may seem like a dark place, it is also the birthplace of transformation. Most people never take the time to truly understand themselves. They spend their lives pleasing others, fitting into social circles, and following trends just to feel accepted. They build their identity around what others expect of them rather than who they really are. But when a man has no friends, he has no choice but to look within. He starts asking questions that many avoid. Who am I? What do I truly want? What is my purpose? Without the influence of friends shaping his thoughts, he begins to see himself with raw honesty. At first, this can be overwhelming. The truth is not always easy to face. When you strip away the opinions of others, you are left with the reality of who you are. And sometimes, that reality is not what you had imagined. But this moment of realization is where true growth begins. A man with no friends learns to accept himself fully, with all his flaws and strengths. He learns to take responsibility for his actions, his choices, and his future. There is no one else to blame, no one else to depend on, just himself. And this is where he starts to build something extraordinary and unshakable in a world. Without the need for validation from others, he learns to trust his own judgment. Without constant social distractions, he gains the ability to focus deeply, to think critically, and to understand life in a way that many never will. He develops an independent mind, free from the pressures of fitting in or seeking approval. This level of self-awareness is rare but incredibly powerful. When a man walks alone, he learns to enjoy his own company. He starts to appreciate the simple things in life, watching a sunset without feeling the need to share it on social media, reading a book not to impress anyone but to genuinely learn, setting goals and achieving them for himself rather than for the recognition of others. He discovers that happiness is not found in the presence of people but in the peace that comes from within. And yet, despite all these strengths, society still looks at a man with no friends as someone to be pitied. People assume that he is lonely, broken, or missing something essential. But what they do not realize is that he is free. Free from fake friendships, free from social expectations, free from the need to be anything other than himself. He does not have to pretend, does not have to compromise his values, does not have to shape himself to fit into a mold that was never meant for him. This kind of freedom is intimidating to many. Most people rely on friendships not just for company but for identity. They define themselves through the people they surround themselves with. They feel validated when others accept them. And they fear rejection because it threatens their sense of self. But the man with no friends does not seek validation externally. He has built an inner foundation so strong that no amount of social approval or disapproval can shake it. As he walks through life, he carries a quiet confidence. He does not need to announce his worth, does not need to prove himself to anyone. He has already done the work within. He understands that relationships should be built on mutual respect, not on fear of loneliness. He knows that the right connections will come naturally, not because he needs them, but because they align with who he truly is. And so, while others chase friendships out of fear, he remains patient. He waits for genuine connections, for people who understand his value, for relationships that are not built on convenience but on real understanding. Until then, he continues his journey, content in the knowledge that he is enough, exactly as he is. Have you ever stood in a crowded room and felt completely alone? Have you ever spoken but no one seemed to listen? Have you ever reached out for a hand only to realize that there was none? Loneliness is often misunderstood. People think that being alone is the same as being lonely, but that is far from the truth. A man with no friends is not necessarily weak, nor is he broken. He is simply on a path that most fear to walk, a path of self-discovery, resilience, and unshakable inner strength. In a world where connection is seen as the ultimate measure of success, being alone is often perceived as failure. Society teaches us from an early age that having many friends is a sign of a fulfilling life. We are encouraged to be social, to blend in, to fit into groups. But what happens when someone does not? What happens when a person finds themselves on the outside looking in? Most would think that such a person is suffering, struggling to find meaning in the absence of companionship. But what if I told you that in this solitude, a person finds something far more valuable than social acceptance? He finds himself. A man with no friends is forced to become his own companion. There is no one to distract him from his thoughts, no one to validate his existence, no one to tell him who he should be. He must confront his own fears, his own failures, and his own insecurities without the comfort of reassurance from others. And while this may sound like a painful journey, it is one of the most powerful experiences a person can go through. Because in those moments of deep solitude, he learns that his strength does not come from the approval of others, but from within himself. Without friends to shape his perspectives, he learns to think for himself. He is not influenced by trends, peer pressure, or the opinions of the masses. He begins to question everything: his beliefs, his purpose, the very nature of his existence. He no longer accepts things at face value, but seeks truth in his own way. And this ability to think independently is rare in a world that thrives on conformity. Many people fear being alone because they believe it makes them insignificant. They attach their worth to the number of people they surround themselves with, thinking that their value is determined by how many others acknowledge them. But a man with no friends learns a different truth. He learns that his worth is not tied to the presence of others. He understands that his existence is meaningful, not because of external validation, but because he chooses to give his life meaning. When there are no friends to rely on, he learns the art of self-sufficiency. He becomes resourceful, relying on his own instincts, his own intellect, and his own abilities. He does not wait for someone to save him, to motivate him, or to push him forward. He becomes his own source of strength. He does not fear solitude, he embraces it. He understands that the ability to stand alone is the foundation of true confidence. But this path is not easy. There will be moments when the silence feels unbearable, when doubt creeps in like a shadow, whispering that he is missing out, that he is incomplete without companionship. There will be moments when he questions whether the journey is worth it. But every time he overcomes these thoughts, he emerges stronger. He realizes that the world's definition of fulfillment is not his definition. He is free to create his own purpose, his own destiny, without the constraints of social expectations. While others seek distractions in endless conversations, he finds peace in silence. While others depend on external validation, he finds validation within himself. While others fear the idea of being alone, he finds strength in his solitude. And in that strength, he discovers something extraordinary. He discovers that he is whole, even without the presence of others. Have you ever noticed how the world glorifies social connections? How society tells us that we must always be surrounded by people to be truly happy? From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to believe that the more friends we have, the more valuable we are. We are taught that being alone is something to be ashamed of, something to be fixed, something to fear. But what if that was never the truth? What if being alone was not a weakness, but a strength? What if a man with no friends was not lost, but in fact more in control of his destiny than anyone else? A man with no friends does not live by the rules that society imposes. He does not seek approval from others because he has learned to approve of himself. He does not chase validation because he understands that his worth is not defined by the people around him. While the world runs after social acceptance, he stands firm, knowing that his journey is not meant to be understood by everyone. His path is different, and different paths are often the hardest to walk. When a man has no friends, he is left with his own mind. There is no outside noise to shape his beliefs, no unnecessary conversations to fill his time. The solitude becomes his greatest teacher, allowing him to explore his thoughts, his dreams, his fears, and his truths without interference. In a world that constantly tells us who we should be, he is one of the few who actually gets to discover who he truly is. Without the distractions of friendships that are often built on convenience rather than depth, he learns the value of his own presence. He does not feel the need to be surrounded by people just for the sake of company. He does not engage in meaningless interactions that add no substance to his life. Instead, he chooses his moments, his words, and his energy wisely. He understands that being alone is not the same as being lonely. There is a vast difference between seeking solitude and feeling abandoned. Most people spend their lives avoiding solitude because they are afraid of what they might find in the silence. They fear facing their own thoughts, their own insecurities, their own unresolved emotions. They use friendships as a distraction, surrounding themselves with people so they never have to be alone with themselves. But a man with no friends has no such escape. He is forced to confront himself, to understand his weaknesses, to embrace his flaws, and to strengthen his spirit. And in doing so, he achieves a level of self-awareness that few ever reach. There is a misconception that a man with no friends must be unhappy, that he must be searching for companionship, that he must be desperate for connection. But what if he has simply outgrown the need for shallow relationships? What if he has learned that peace comes from within, not from the presence of others? He is not bitter, he is wise. He does not reject people, he simply does not depend on them for his happiness. He has learned to enjoy his own company, to be content in his own space, to find joy in his own existence without needing external validation. While others rely on friends for motivation, he learns to push himself. While others seek guidance from those around them, he finds answers within. While others fall apart when left alone, he thrives in his solitude. This independence does not make him cold or distant, it makes him strong. It makes him someone who can stand tall even when there is no one beside him. It makes him someone who can navigate life without the need for approval, without the fear of rejection, without the burden of trying to fit into places he was never meant to belong. There will be moments when the world makes him feel like he is missing out, like he is incomplete without friends, like his life lacks meaning because he walks alone. But deep down, he knows the truth. He knows that not all connections are meaningful, not all friendships are real, and not all company is worth keeping. He chooses depth over numbers, purpose over popularity, and authenticity over acceptance. He understands that true fulfillment does not come from how many people surround you, but from how at peace you are when you are by yourself. Have you ever wondered what it truly means to stand alone? To walk a path that few dare to tread? To exist in a world that constantly tells you that you need others to be complete, yet find yourself standing on your own? A man with no friends is often misunderstood. People assume he is broken, that he is lacking something essential, that he must be lonely or in need of companionship. But what if the truth was entirely different? What if his solitude was not a curse, but a choice? What if in the absence of friends he discovered something far more valuable, his own unshakable sense of self? In a society where friendships are often seen as status symbols, where people measure their worth by the number of contacts in their phones, and where social interactions are sometimes built on convenience rather than authenticity, a man with no friends refuses to conform. He does not seek friendship for the sake of filling a void. He does not chase after people just to avoid the silence. He understands that not all companionship is meaningful, and not all relationships add value to his life. Instead of surrounding himself with people who do not truly understand him, he chooses the depth of solitude where he can think, grow, and truly be himself without compromise. When a man walks alone, he learns to listen not to the noise of the world, but to the voice within. He begins to understand himself in ways that most people never do, without the influence of others dictating who he should be, what he should believe, or how he should act. He is free to define his own identity. His thoughts are his own. His beliefs are his own. His choices are his own. He does not follow trends blindly, nor does he feel the pressure to fit in. He is his own person, and that is a rare kind of freedom. There is a strength that comes with solitude, a power that many fail to recognize. While others seek comfort in numbers, he finds resilience in his independence. While others need constant reassurance, he builds confidence from within. He does not rely on anyone to tell him he is worthy, capable, or strong. He knows it because he has proven it to himself. Every challenge he faces alone. Every obstacle he overcomes through his own determination. There is no safety net, no backup plan, no one to catch him if he falls. And yet, he rises. Most people fear being alone because they equate it with loneliness, but the two are not the same. Loneliness is a longing for connection, a feeling of emptiness, a need for external validation. But being alone, when embraced fully, is an opportunity for growth. It is a time to reflect, to heal, to build oneself from the inside out. A man with no friends does not see his solitude as something to be pitied. He sees it as a space where he can focus on what truly matters: his goals, his dreams, his passions, and his purpose. People often assume that a man with no friends must be unhappy, that he must crave companionship, that he must be waiting for someone to come along and change his circumstances. But what if he is at peace? What if he has found joy in his own presence? What if he has realized that true happiness does not come from how many people surround him, but from how deeply he understands himself? He does not need constant interaction to feel alive. He does not need the approval of others to feel valued. He does not need to be part of a group to feel a sense of belonging. He belongs to himself, and that is enough. While others spend their lives pleasing people, adjusting their personalities to fit into different social circles, and bending themselves to be liked, he remains unchanged. He does not compromise his values for acceptance. He does not alter his beliefs to be more agreeable. He does not become someone else just to avoid solitude. He chooses authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, and self-respect over temporary connections. There will always be moments when the world makes him feel as though he is missing out, that he should be more social, that he should make an effort to build friendships. Society will try to convince him that his life is incomplete without a circle of people constantly surrounding him. But deep down, he knows better. He knows that not all friendships are real, not all company is beneficial, and not all connections are worth keeping. He understands that the ability to stand alone is not a sign of weakness, it is the greatest strength a person can possess.